NAFI would like to thank Sporties and AOPA for their generous sponsorship of this episode of the More Right Rudder podcast. Time to renew your CFI? Sporty's free CFI portal makes it easy, with access to their FAA-approved eFERC at no cost. You can also track student progress through Sporty's courses, access professional lesson plans and endorsement guides, and get exclusive CFI-only discounts. It's everything you need to stay current and support your students with confidence. Sign up free at sporties.com/CFI today. Thanks for tuning in to this episode of the More Right Rudder podcast from the National Association of Flight Instructors. My name is Sarah Staudt. I'm the Program Development Manager here at NAFI. Joining me today for this episode is Jason Blair, a DPE aviation writer and friend of NAFI. Thanks for joining us today, Jason.
Happy to be here on a rainy, windy day in Michigan, so at least we get to spread some information if we don't get to go flying. It's at least a good use of the day that way, right?
Right? Yeah, winds kept me on the ground yesterday, too. I was supposed to go out in my friend's 150, and the winds here would have had it flying without the engine even running. So,
And as long as you loosen it up a little bit, you're off the ground, you can log that, I think. So, yeah.
I think so.
Yeah.
I mean,
Call it
we'd have to
glider
run
time.
it just like a second for the under your own power thing, but beyond that.
Yeah. Intention to fly counted, yeah. So I see it. Yeah.
So we left it snug in the hangar to not have to chase it down the ramp, and we're hoping for another day.
I definitely made the same choice with my my tail wheel today, direct crosswind. I think it was a good idea to not fight that demon today. So yeah.
All right. Well, fun flying stories or fun stories of getting stuck on the ground aside, we're here to talk about the DPE shortage, how it exists or if it exists, and some of the numbers surrounding that, as well as what us as flight training providers, independent flight instructors can be doing to get better utilization out of the DPE group that we do have.
Yeah, it's an interesting kind of discussion that's been happening, especially over the last couple of years, where people have really felt that pressure to try and get a check ride done. When I look at this, it's not just a number of examiners that we have shortage issue. It's how we use them, who those examiners are, and when we put that also in a little bit of context with what's happening in the flight training community and their demand on that system, we can understand this a little bit better. And then also maybe come up with some things as flight training providers we can focus on to make sure when we do have check rides, we don't waste those slots and we actually get good maximization of utilization out of those DPEs.
Yeah, and I think that's one of the key pieces here as you work through your information, and certainly both of us as designees. I'm not a DPE. I do flight instructor renewal sign-offs as an administrative designation, but there's certainly things where Jason has gotten text messages from me from complaining about if only people would do this paperwork.
Well, so it's really simple stuff, right? But it starts with the CFIs as they're going through it. And we see this a lot. And I'll actually throw some of the AMEs under the bus too. It's very common that I see somebody show up with a check ride and their medical doesn't have their middle name on it, or it has a middle initial, and that doesn't match what's on their student pilot certificate, and or may not match what's on whatever photo ID they give us, right? So it's important to get these things to match up, because technically as designees, we have to see the photo ID match what's on your pilot certificate, whether it's student or upper level certificate, and also what's on your medical. So those things really do come through. And that means the instructor has to take the time to work with those students when they're helping them set up. If you're going into Med Express, make sure they're putting in their full name, because the doctor may not catch it. They don't have a middle name in there, or may not know that they don't have one, especially if their ID doesn't match it. And we got to make sure these things all match up. Otherwise it becomes a hiccup point for that check ride. And all of these things kind of roll into like where the pressure points are in this, right? So let's I guess come back to some of those, but I want to share a little bit of data with us and help folks understand that it's not just about the number of DPEs we have. It's also about the pressure that's put on those DPEs, the number of requested tests, and then how many of those DPEs are actively doing larger numbers of tests. We look back, we kind of go to 2011. We had 944 examiners kind of at the end of that fiscal year. And we did about 60,621 practical tests with examiners. Now, caveat here, this does not include self-examining authority tests that happen at 141 programs. This is just through designees. And that averaged out to about 64 check rides per examiner that was needed to complete the meeting of the demand that happened. Well, since we went through a little bit further here down the road, and we get to 2017, 18, 19, 2020 was down a little bit, but honestly, training numbers were up even though COVID was there. By 21 and 22, we were hitting record numbers of DPE activity, at least in the last few decades. Maybe in the 70s and 60s, it hit bigger numbers. But for recent history, in 2023, we did with 969 examiners, 140,954 check rides. And that's test, retest, discontinuance, things we had to go into IACR and do basically. So that required an average of 145 check rides per examiner. And when we put that in context, that means the practical test volume in 2023 compared to 2011 was up 232%.
As I was thinking, yeah, that's more than
That's
double.
huge. Yeah, and I get it, right? Because everybody in 2020, 21 was going, man, all these airline pilots are retiring. What a great career path. Get your kids, get your family, get yourself in, get through that training. You're going to get a good job, right? And so that ramped up the demand. Flight training providers ramped it up and tried to push people through. But at the same time, we didn't know that in the FAA system. Holy crap, we're going to need all these people. So we had not ramped up the number of DPEs to meet that yet. There was no real way to gauge that. Now, what I
Yeah,
will
that
say
just
is,
crawled out of the
since then,
woodwork.
it did. It popped out, right? And it takes time to get DPEs. It takes time to get people that are qualified. The FAA has to train them. I mean, it usually takes a good 2 years for a DPE to get onboarded. By the time they get selected, they go through training. They do some oversight with their local examiner, their local FAA inspector, I should say. And then they get to actually doing the check ride. So it takes a while to spool this up. Now, in the last couple of years, I'm going to tell you the FAA has been doing a pretty good job at trying to address this. They've actually expanded the number of people that they're allowing through initial DPE training courses. They bumped that up a little bit. And as they've been working to select new DPEs, they're working hard to make sure they're examiners that actually have the time to do the job. So if we look back and we kind of look back at 2012, 13, 14, we had like 50% on average, somewhere around there, plus or minus a couple percent of our examiners that we had were doing less than 50 check rides per year. So, a couple a month, right? And a lot of them
Mhm.
are retired guys. They were, airline guys, whatever, and they're doing this. And I get it. They don't, they shouldn't have to work every day at this point. But we do need some service out to the industry to keep this training industry going. So at the same time, we were seeing 25, 30% of the examiners doing more than 100 check rides a year. And a very small percentage of examiners do more than 300 check rides a year. Might have been 40 or 50 in the whole country at that point. If we go to 23 and 24 fiscal years, we're seeing the effects of the FAA selecting examiners that are more able to do the work and have the time. Some of them are a little younger, a little more, wanting to do this, right? So last year we saw 55% of our examiners do more than 100 check rides in a year, and it was down to 27% that were doing less than 50 in a year. So we're actually not just adding some examiners, we're adding examiners that will do more, and that increases the overall throughput in the system, the ability to meet the demand for the number of tests
Mhm.
out there.
Yeah, exactly. 'Cause you do need that overall capacity. It's not strictly, like you said, just because we have one new person or one additional DPE doesn't magically mean the capacity of the entire system has increased by a certain amount. If that's a higher or lower capacity individual, that matters.
Right. And if we see 10 examiners retire that were in their 70s that were doing 20 check rides a year, but we bring in 20 examiners who are in their 40s or 50s and are doing 100 a year, that's a net increase of number of available test slots, while at the same time not increasing the burden to the FAA for oversight in terms of the
Mhm.
number of examiners that they have to oversee, which is also a key part of this. The FAA does have to oversee the examiners, and there's a national office that's working on this right now, bringing a lot of examiners into a national team. This was part of an ARAC that we did, an Aviation Rulemaking Advisory Committee. They kind of recommended some changes to the system, and also a way to maximally utilize ASIs who aren't necessarily in the local FISDOs. The local FISDOs are having a hard time recruiting people to come work there. I mean, it's a pretty good government job, but you don't get to fly as much. And the industry has been extremely competitive with hiring and salaries. And there's a lot of people who might previously have gone to work for the FAA that are just having a hard time passing up on those wonderful bonuses and the pay rates that the airlines are offering. And I get it, so they're going there. So we need to recruit some folks into the FAA that would like to do that work too, because we do need them to help provide oversight of the examiner system to be able to have more examiners in that context.
And that can vary really widely by geography and individual FSDO as well. The FSDO I report to, never has a problem. I'm seeing new ASIs come through there all the time, but then I also know that the fast team side of our FSDO is really struggling because the neighboring FSDOs can't get an ASI into some of those roles, and they're short ASIs in general.
Right.
And so, these FSDOs aren't terribly far apart, but they just serve very different geographies. So the one I'm in, has a huge metropolitan area, bit easier to find and get and recruit people to come there. The other one has a much more rural area. And so there's just challenges
Yeah, this is
with
just
with that
challenge of
and getting people
workforce.
to move to those types of things or finding people who exist there. And of course, you've got your government pay scale, so you get paid less to work at that FSDO than you do to the one I report to because it's further away from the metropolitan area. So
Right.
things like that all play a role.
Yeah, and it takes a long time to onboard an FAA inspector also. They're really
Mhm.
a good couple of years of training through the FAA system to fully be able to do all of the work that they do also.
Yeah. Yeah, so your new hires aren't gonna be doing this right off the bat.
Yep. So now on the other side of the house, let's talk about like there's some things flight training providers can do to not waste examiner slots, right? So I'll tell you one of the big ones that really kind of irks examiners. We have our pet peeves, right? Don't double book us. Because you're taking a slot away from somebody else. I mean, I had somebody a day or two ago that I shot him a text and said, "Hey, we're on for next Thursday, just checking in, making sure." And I got the note back, "Oh, I already got it done with another examiner." Well, I had blocked that slot off, and that was, slots that somebody else needs,
Mm.
right? So we had a little bit of data from internal at the FAA. They sampled into what I'll call actively high volume training environment FISDOs, and they found almost 40% of the applicants that they talked to said they were scheduling with more than one examiner. So that's a kind of a tough thing. Now, what I will say is also when you schedule, give the examiner some information, right? So you call us or text us and we're up flying, leave us a message. A lot of times they'll get a text, "I need a check ride. When are you available?" Who are you? Where are you? What kind of plane are we doing? What kind of test are we doing? Because a lot of times I'm bouncing between airports, right? If you tell me I need a check ride on Tuesday and there's a commercial single engine add-on check ride at Airport X, and I look at my schedule and be like, wow, I can't give you Tuesday, but Wednesday I'm at that airport already, I'll probably propose something else to you. So some really kind of important things to, and I actually saw this posted at another flight school. It said, your message to the examiner must include your name, your FTN number, your phone number, your email address, the certificate you're applying for, where you want the check ride to be done, what kind of airplane you'll be flying, and any other information pertinent to your situation, right? So tell us this stuff. Give us the information because then, I get on the ground, I get a voicemail, I make myself some notes, I can start looking at, all right, where can I fit this in? This communication piece is really helpful for us. I mean, I had the 1 week that I had over 60 requests for check rides in a week. So I'm not gonna be able to get them all right, but I might be like, hey, I talked to this other examiner, I know they got a slot, you want to go with them, and we'll work with each other and a lot of times to help make sure you get set up for it. Communicate with us. Like we're humans too. Most of us text, email, phone, leave a voicemail. I know this is scary for some of our younger generation to leave a voicemail, right? Actually talk on the phone. There's some generational communication gaps here, and some of our examiners are older and don't want to text, right? So, talk with your flight training provider, talk with your school. They've worked with these examiners. Find out the best way to communicate, but give us information that lets us help figure out when we're going to be able to get you in and where we're going to do it.
Right, and if you're on the DPE's website to find their phone number or email address to begin with, or Facebook page, or however, I've seen DPEs use a huge variety of tools, like, that information's probably there
Yeah.
on their preferred communication methods, or if they have a
Yeah.
yeah, if they have a form or a calendar or, I've seen all sorts of stuff, but this is probably information that's findable.
And many times it's sent to you ahead of time. So, take advantage of that stuff and be good at the communication. So, also communicate with us if you've got a hiccup, right? If you're 4 days out from the check ride and you just got a call from your instructor and you found out the airplane's broken, it probably won't be fixed. Don't wait till the day before to tell us. So we actually have to put our check ride approval requests into a system called DMS, Designee Management System. And we are supposed to have that in more than 24 hours ahead. And it gives us an approval to do that test. So this is not the IACRA side. You guys get, as students and instructors put the IACRA stuff in. We have to then take that information out of IACRA and input it as well. if we get notified late and we can't do that with more than 24 hours, we can't put somebody else into a Checkride slot on that day. And that means we waste that slot. So, if something's going to be wrong, the airplane's unairworthy, you're coming down with that cold, you don't feel good. First of all, please don't pass it to us and get us sick. And then, we can't do more Checkrides when we're sick. So, help us make sure that we're not wasting slots. It might be your school says, hey, George isn't going to be ready, but can we swap Susie in? Okay, great. If we got information and time to do that, we can do that in a lot of cases with, I like 48 hours notice. It'll help us figure out, because we've got to do a little paperwork. And I've had folks that are like, your note said it had to be to you 48 hours ahead. I got it out to you 48 hours and 20 minutes ahead. Yeah, but I was in the air, or it's 2 a.m. when you submitted it. So we've got some paperwork that we've got to do on our side and help us have that information ahead of time so we can make sure we're using it, or repurposing slots if, somebody isn't able to use it.
Yeah, and that's all respecting that capacity in the broader system. Because if you're losing slots over paperwork technicalities, you can't get that day back.
And I know there's a lot of folks out there like, it's just the examiner trying to make more money, right? We want to maximize our slots. I get it. Yes, this is a business for us as examiners also. But when you waste slots like that, you're also wasting slots for other people in the flight training community. So I had an instructor a couple weeks ago. I showed up. We had no logged ground training. This is one of those things that's very common. Well, that poor student had showed up to the Checkride. He didn't know that he needed it. And this was a private pilot ride. This instructor wasn't available. We called. He's like, sorry, I can't do it today. Well, that instructor or the student had taken a day off of work, right? So he burned himself a vacation day. It was a gorgeous, beautiful day. Of course it was, right? And I go home and he goes home and we're trying to get him rescheduled. Well, in the meantime, that instructor quit working there. He's got to switch to another instructor. I've got to figure out how to get him in. And this poor guy's 3 more weeks down the road before he gets a Checkride, right? In the meantime, he's trying to stay current, stay proficient, and that's costing him money and time too. So, doing this is not just about the examiner making money and using that slot. It's about being respectful of your student, your customer's time, their ability to get those practical tests done, and other folks in the industry too. Because if we're blowing slots out, we're wasting them for everybody else. And right now we've seen some estimations out of the FAA that we think about 30% of the practical test slots are not able to proceed as scheduled. Actually, there's a FAA article in the FAA Safety magazine a couple of months back here on that. Boy, that's a big number, right? If 30% aren't happening, what if we could
You
get
kind
30%
of have to
with
pick your
Checkride?
battle. Do you want to complain that there's a DPE shortage when up to 30% is being wasted, or do you want to fuss that, well, the DPE is just making money? I'm like, well, DPE's got to get paid somehow, and so we're never going to get it down to perfection, but certainly 30% it feels like a huge inefficiency, and
That's
so
big.
there's always going to be those, the weather's bad,
So
that.
this is not including weather cancellations. This is typically for missing paperwork and broken
Oh, okay.
airplanes. Airplanes that they show up for the check ride and they find the aircraft is unairworthy, right? And this is actually one of those things that's really important. I can't tell you how many times I've shown up to a check ride and the applicant says, today's the first day I've ever looked at the logbooks for the airplane. Huh?
Yeah,
And
no,
then
you
that's
and
for
your instructor
broken
should have
airplanes.
sat down last week with your little colored sticky notes and
Yeah. And then like, okay, so I see you have an AD that's due. When was it last completed? When's it due again? Right? The examiner's got to figure out, am I getting an airplane that's legal? Right? Or do I have a problem? Well, if I start finding things that are a problem, hopefully if you identify it, most examiners are going to give you the discontinuance. If you're unaware of why the airplane is not airworthy and you say we're good to go, that's a knowledge issue. And we've seen crazy stuff on this. I had an examiner send me a picture the other day. They were taxiing out and the window in the 172 had a huge crack in it. Like he was able to push it out a little bit and like his finger could stick out the window. And, he kind of gave the last ditch to the applicant, said, so is this a problem? And the applicant said, no, we've been flying it this way. Wow. We got lots of problems here, right? Like, okay, so why did the instructor not notice this for the check ride? Why has the instructor been flying it this way? Why did it get to the check ride? Why doesn't the applicant know that a broken windshield is an unairworthy airplane, right? So, maintenance is a lot of things. And so a lot of things we run into really commonly that hang up check rides for this. Missing ELT inspections, missing pedostatic inspections, transponder checks, missing AD compliance, right? Well, here's our AD compliance from 2014. Okay, well, what about the last 10 years, right? Do we know that all of the ADs have been complied with? Can you identify that? And then we get out to the airplane and find stuff too, right? I mean, geez, I see this, this pop washer or pop rivet in the wing, right? I mean, where it's supposed to be a structural wing, or, there's stuff missing. I mean, there's a twin Comanche I got to, and there's 6 top cowl screws. 3 of the 6 that are in the center portion of it were fully stripped out. I mean, they were screwed down, but they didn't actually attach to anything.
Mm.
So, is this airplane airworthy? And the answer again I got was, well, we've been flying it. Well, I mean, that's great until the cowl flies off, right? So, just because the
Right.
airplane flew yesterday doesn't mean it's airworthy to keep flying. And you
Right.
really got to look at
That's a
this.
lot of the logic we hear with people doing, their little 134.5 operations. Well, we've been doing it. I'm like, cool. That doesn't mean you've been legal the whole time.
Right. You can do it until you get caught, and there's a problem. And unfortunately, the check rides are catching a lot of these, right? And that's what's generating the look. We're going to give you a disapproval or a non ability to continue as we do this. So, be really familiar with that airplane. Know that it's airworthy, and if there's concerns going into the check ride, switch airplanes if that's an option, or get the check ride rescheduled to a time when that airplane is going to be airworthy, and you can show up and get the whole check ride done.
Yeah, because I know some FISDOs, or maybe it's a nationwide thing, they don't want DPEs starting check rides unless there's a reasonable chance you can get the whole thing done.
So that's actually national policy. Yeah, we are not supposed to start a test. We do not expect to complete in the same day. So, if you show up and show me the airplane, it's straight up not airworthy, we're gonna not start, right? If that happens before. But a lot of times, like, we don't have to necessarily go out and physically pre-flight the airplane before we start. We gotta look through the logbooks, make sure it looks like it's airworthy, and then continue into that. But we find
Mhm.
things in the airplanes themselves all the time. And I've had, in the last 2 weeks, I've had 2 people end up flying to me for a check ride. We identified things when they got there, and they got to find another way home because the airplane was grounded because it wasn't airworthy. So, I will give the tip: if you determine the aircraft is unairworthy during the process of qualifying for the practical test, don't fly that airplane home. Don't just disregard it. Do it the right way. Call your flight training provider and say they've got to handle it. Because we've also had people then just decide, I'm going to fly home anyway. And you're putting yourself at a lot of risk when you do that too.
Right. Yeah, especially once it's known. I mean, that's probably an
Right.
insurance thing. That's, aside from the regulatory,
Well, and
and then what decision making are you demonstrating to
we
your
do have to
examiner?
document as the examiner, if we discontinued a test that the aircraft was unairworthy, we have to finish that in DMS and close it out and say, hey, we discontinued because the aircraft was found to be unairworthy. If you then fly it home, there is now a federal record that airplane was unairworthy.
Mhm.
So, that hangs out there, and will anybody catch it? Probably not until something goes wrong. But if something goes wrong and people start looking at records, that's not a helpful thing. So, um, let's talk experience requirements. That's another one that we run into a lot of check rides getting hung up for. I had one yesterday. I actually had to go digging deep on this one. It was a commercial long cross country, the 61-129, which says it has to be more than 300 total miles, stops at full stop landings at 3 points, and one of the points has to be 250 miles or more away. And I popped it into my flight planner, and it showed up as 249.9, the 2 airports. And everybody, the instructor and the student and I kind of went, now I went digging at this point, and the official answer is, you find the lat long for the airports, and that is the official airport reference point, and did a GPS calculator between the 2 points, and it came up between the lat longs as 250.3 miles. So that is the official answer. I'll be honest, I took a screenshot, I saved it, it's going in my record for that. ForeFlight called it 250 on the even. ForeFlight rounds to the mile. iFlight Planner, the other one I use, had 249.9. That rounds to the 10th and will round down. And then the reference point calculator with the GIS software I used was 250.3. So I've got something to hang my hat on for that particular check ride. But we see this a lot of times where cross countries aren't long enough. And the examiner is going to go through this, especially for the private, the instrument, the commercial, those long cross country requirements. They have to meet the specific requirements. And the best advice I can give is don't get creative. Don't try and cut it short. Just do what the regulation says. Make sure
Right,
you've
was there
gone
not another
somewhere
airport
right,
just
10 more miles, right? I mean,
yeah.
anything. Make it clear and make sure where you go also meets the 61.1 requirement. So a cross country for any rating or certificate must include a landing point beyond the place you started at that is more than 50 miles away. I had a great private, we call it the bad triangle for the private pilot, where they went out like 43 miles. They flew a 50-mile leg to a controlled airport, which was cool. They were getting their controlled airport ops in, and it was like a 47-mile leg back, but they never actually ended up going somewhere 50 miles away from where they started. They were in the middle of the triangle. So we had lots of issues with that one. One, it didn't actually count for cross country at all. Two, the endorsement that they gave them for the cross country didn't include the endorsement to an airport under 50 miles away. And we were missing something there. And second of all, it didn't really count for the long cross country at all. So it was a great experience. They got their towered airport operations requirement out on that, but none of the rest of it counted as cross country. And when we found out on the check ride, they didn't get to go forward with the check ride that day. So now check ride doesn't happen. They got to go back, fly another cross country and do this over. And it cost them money and everybody time, and a check ride slot got wasted again.
Right, and you gotta wonder if that instructor had sent any other students out on that, who they just hadn't gotten to that check ride point yet, who are now gonna have to go out in.
Right. And that we see that a lot. When you poke and find one of these, you're like, oh, the last 25 of our students have done that flight. Oopsie. So instrument, we got a hiccup there. So I used to do some tests at an airport that did not have an instrument approach. The instrument law in cross country says must have an instrument approach at each airport. Well, they would come back, fly to a nearby airport, and then fly back in VFR. Well, we didn't have an approach at the last one. So in a case like that, stop at another airport, terminate that particular cross-country flight there, and then have a separate return to home flight that's VFR. So make sure those cross-country requirements are met. The commercial is by far the worst that we have experience requirements missing. That 61 129 stuff. We have things that are dual training required. We have 100-mile, 2-hour night cross country, 100-mile, 2-hour day and night, those cross countries. That has to be with an instructor. We've got the TA time, but then we also have solo things. And people get this mixed up. They see DPIC and they think of it as dual instruction while acting as PIC. Unfortunately, we've got legal interpretations on there that say this is not dual receive. This is DPIC. You are acting as the PIC on that flight. An instructor may ride along for those. And this is commonly done when they're doing an initial, but they have to ride along for all 10 hours of that, which includes the long cross country and the nighttime that has the 10 night takeoffs and landings at a controlled airport. We see a mix and match in there. If you're doing this on a single engine airplane, I'm going to tell you the best way to do it is do it solo. And solo means you are the sole occupant of that airplane. Now, if you put notes in there that said Aunt Gertrude took the ride with me, that's not solo. If you don't tell the examiner somebody rode with you and we don't know, okay, great, we don't know. It's not the right answer, but we're not going to ask. But if we see logged as dual received from your instructor on those, it's going to box out those cross countries. And it is flat tragic when we see that nice long, 500-mile cross country somebody did. They went out 250 plus to a landing place, hopefully not 250.3, hopefully 260 or 70.
Yeah, I was going to say, I think I went 265 or something like
pick something
that. Yeah.
further, right? And then they come back and we tell them that whole cross country doesn't count. So just do what the reg says on those. Make it easy. Be able to identify those requirements for the examiner. They're going to show up at the check ride and say, hey, show me these things, right? So, take the time before you go to the check ride with your instructor, go through a really good experience checklist. There's a lot of them out there. There's even some on my website. Download them for free, work through that stuff, make sure you've met all the requirements. And if you have something missing, you can identify it before you get to check ride day, because we don't have to want to send you home at that moment and say, here's the extra $2,000 you're going to have to fly on a long cross country. Painful at that point. And I get instructors want to go along and get that flight time too, but some things the regs just say do solo. So do them solo. So make sure your students get them done.
Yeah, those so much of the regs comes down to single words,
Yep.
solo or
Even
and or
commas,
must
right?
or
Even a comma
may
here or there.
and they all have different meanings they're all very specific things. And so you can't say, well, it says solo, but as long as I don't have another pilot.
Yeah, yeah. So ground training's regularly missed too, right? If we look at the ground training for all of the initial certificates, the private, whether it's rec, sport, private, the instrument, the commercial, and the CFI, they all have requirements for ground training in there. And what a lot of people mix up is the or an approved ground training course, right? So they take an online course from, take your pick of favorite, Kings, Sporties, ASA, whoever it happens to be, Gold Seal, there's a bunch of them out there. But what I've noticed is pretty much all of those, when you get that graduation certificate, the verbiage on it says the course was in preparation for the private pilot knowledge test, right? So that's not the practical test. And we've got regulations. If we look at the private 61105, 61107, say must receive and log ground training from an authorized instructor. And that is for the practical test. There's a list of specific things that you have to cover in there. 6165 has it for the instrument. 7 and 105 are in there for commercials. And then we got the lovely CFI's got it's in there also. I don't have the number up in front of me, but they're all there, right? And this means an instructor has to log ground training covering those specific subject areas. And that when they do that, it has to be just like you log flight time. It's going to have to be what meets 6151 requirements for an instructor. They're going to have to log what they did, when they did it, the day, what you covered. They have to sign their name. They have to put their expiration or recency of experience date on there. Just like you do for flying, we have to have this. Now, most logbooks don't have great space for this. Now, the reg doesn't also say it has to be in your pilot flight training logbook. It says it must be logged in a training record. So, good instructors have training records they work. Some are digital in a lot of flight training operations. Those are, kind of more modern stuff. You could do this in a spreadsheet. I've even seen it where every time somebody did one of these, their instructor emailed them. And they just had this pile of emails that listed everything they covered and the dates they did it. As an instruction provider, make sure you're providing this training. Now, it's an incomplete list of things, but these are what the regs cover. If that was all you trained your student on, they're probably not going to pass the practical test. But the examiner does need to see that you have logged at least some training in all of these areas to be eligible for the practical test. And I'll tell you, I have a lot of providers. They've got just standard sheets that list all of these. And as long as they provided that training on one day and sometime, that's the minimum they have to document. Could you document more? Would a good instructor log every time they did it with their student? Yeah, I think so, right? But as
My
long as
my
you're
the back of
doing it.
my logbook, like, there's the notes page, and then, like, there's that, like, blank page before the back cover. It
Yeah,
is absolutely littered. I mean, like, the poor page is practically out of it. I mean, the logbook's held together with packing tape anyways.
yeah,
Thankfully, it's safe, and I've moved on to a new one, but yeah, I mean, it is all just handwritten when we ran out of lines because there's most of these logbooks, especially, like, those little ones that come in the kits, they only have what, like, 8 lines for
and that's
notes
nowhere
or
near
ground
enough,
training or
right?
whatever in
Yeah,
in the back.
yep.
And so, yeah, no, mine's all over the back cover and that extra page.
And nobody says it has to be in the logbook, right? I mean, I'll tell you with my own students, I just have a new one that I started. He's doing his private in a Stinson, which is pretty cool to me. I've got a Google sheet. It's shared with him. Every time we get together and do something, I type up what we did. He knows what we did. He knows how much time. It's a way for him to kind of track his training too. And that's actually good for your students, right? They know what's coming. I've got a list of stuff that we're going to have to cover. It's kind of a makeshift syllabus in that case that I'm using since I'm doing this just as a personal instructor, not in a large training environment. But a lot of training environments have that too, right? Whether there's software that you're using or there's a TCO, 141, document this stuff and have it for them because they are going to need to at least show the examiner, here it is. And I'll be honest, and most of the check rides I do with places that do this well, it's a perfunctory moment. They slide across a sheet or they hand me the binder, and here's the page of endorsements. Here's the page of the ground training, and I can go, great. It's the same sheets I've seen 27 times with new names and new dates, and we're done. It gets really hard on a check ride when you go, Do you have any log ground training? Well, we log some here and there, and it's in our flight dispatch program, and I can only access that on my iPhone. And oh my God, I've been there for hours sometimes. And there's times where we go, look, I don't even know if you're eligible for check ride. The answer is I'm not going to give you one until I know you're eligible. But since you can't show it to me, I'm going home. Right. And I have
Right, yeah, print
unhappy
that kind of
instructors
stuff
like,
and,
right. And they're like, but I
it
gave
feels
them the
kinda old
training.
school, but
Yeah. Like just give us something to hang that hat on
right,
that shows it for
yeah.
us. So,
Yeah, that's
really
why I
important.
always just wrote it in the back of logbooks and that way it's just there.
Yeah.
And we usually always like, when I was at the 141 school, of course, it was all computerized and documented in their system. And even when I was training Part 61, we had the syllabus sheets and in the one school I was at printed the whole syllabus and we had a file drawer and like this folder was lesson 1 and lesson 2 and you would just go get the lesson you need and then you'd fill it out and put it in your student's file, which was in the drawer below.
Yep.
And
And there's a
it
lot of
works.
training providers, and some of them are sponsors of NAFI that offer these things. Some of them even give
It
all
was
these
one of those,
syllabuses
yep.
out free, right? Like you could download. I mean, their hope is obviously that with the syllabus, you would then buy their books and use those with your students. But I mean, dear God, use the tools that are out there. You don't have to reinvent the wheel. There's a lot of cool stuff out there that you can use that makes your student one understand their training better, but also able to demonstrate that when they get to the practical test and not have to get sent home without continuing forward with the test. And that's so frustrating for everybody, including them. I mean,
Mhm.
this is good professional CFI. Make sure they're providing that documentation for their students also.
Right, and a lot of those, flight instructor, or those train, courseware developers and that, so many of them now, and I'm a member of at least 2 of them, have their flight instructor portals, so if your student buys their kit, you can track it all electronically that way, and they have access to it through their website, through their app, and I do too.
Right.
And that can help make that so much easier, and I was talking about all the paper in the file drawers, that's when we were still selling these things on DVDs. So, I'm not necessarily saying that's the modern solution, that's what we were doing at the time. But, today and it's all free to me
Yeah.
as a CFI.
Super cool tools out there. And a lot of
Mhm.
people maybe listening to this are new CFIs even, right? We don't expect you to know everything yet. There's a lot of great content out there. Certainly leverage FA content, all the airplane flying handbooks and PX and instrument flying handbook. Those are the base documents. And I'd be remiss if I didn't mention. Note that the ACS is not the entire document you need to train a student, right? Those ACSs give references to where things come from, where that ACS builds standards and expectations. Certainly have all of those documents and they're free from the FA. You can certainly get them
Mhm.
printed and pay for them, if you jump on any of the training products providers that offer physical printed options, but you can get them for free from the FAA. Make sure you're leveraging them and resource, those with your students, use them for yourself and them. But then there's all kinds of supplemental materials that are out there that you can use. Vet the materials you're going to be using, make sure they're good ones. Find stuff
Mhm.
that works with your teaching style, your aircraft that you're using, the airspace you're going to be in, and your students' learning styles. I do want to mention something about the DP utilization that we hadn't talked about yet is pass rates on practical tests. Make sure as an instructor and training provider that you're really making sure your student is ready for those practical tests. We do see in the last few years declining pass rates on practical tests. And I kind of had this epiphany about January this year. We were looking at the numbers and it had gone down a couple percent again, kind of across the board. And the math in my brain didn't completely work out when I compared it to those numbers they gave earlier about number of practical tests. And what kind of came out is the pass rate that the FAA produces that they give in the airman's certification data each year is inclusive of retests. So when we see a
Mm.
73% pass rate on tests, that means that's also including, well, George passed the second time, right? So George isn't a 0% pass rate, he's a 50% pass rate. Wow, when we look at this, we're seeing 5, 6, 7,000 more practical tests a year end up in disapprovals. And I think part of it is everybody's in kind of certificate generation mode. We really need to focus on airman development mode. This is important for flight instructors. We are the first experiences these people are having as they go through their training. Primacy is an important thing. The things we train them now are going to carry forward into their entire flying career. And if somebody's not ready for the practical test, don't just send them in hope. Make sure they're ready. Sometimes that's a little humble pie too. You might go, man, I don't know if I'm the right instructor. Maybe somebody else has to teach us. And we're gonna nod to the right rudder here. I remember the moment with an Olin student of mine. His name was Brady Lane. Awesome dude. We did his entire sport pilot on camera years ago up at EAA in a Remos. And about halfway through getting ready to solo, Brady, more right rudder. Brady, some more right rudder. Brady, less left rudder. Like, and he's like just not quite getting it. We're veering a little bit left all the time. He went and flew with another instructor, and he came back. He said, "Man, Whitney said I need more right rudder." And I was like, "Dude, this is all on camera, right? Like, go back and look." He's like, "I'll be darned, you were telling me that, right?" So he wasn't hearing it from me, right? So just because the students got the experience requirements done, don't send them to the check ride. Make sure they're ready. If you're having a hard time, you got a learning plateau, don't be afraid to have another instructor step in and help out too and team teach that. Because when we just send the students to the check rides, they're like, well, maybe they'll pass, maybe they won't. We're kind of doing them a disservice. This is something that carries with them the whole career that they're going to go through, right? Make sure they're ready, make sure they're good, and be willing to be honest with yourself of if there's something that's just not getting from you to them, take the time to get it right. Maybe have some help with it and work them through it, because then we don't waste that check ride slot again. I know we kind of come back to that, but it's more about customer service at that point and making sure they're really ready. And there's a lot of pressure on this. This is hard. You're going to have parents that are saying, little Billy has his experience done. I don't want to pay anymore. Send him to the check ride. Well, that gets pretty expensive if they don't pass.
Right. It's a lot more expensive than just going up and doing, a mock check ride or even just another flight with somebody else if they're stuck on something.
That maybe doesn't mean you're done with that student. Maybe they just did a couple things with somebody else. They come back to you for the rest, right? I mean, this is part of the training landscape that we got to make sure we do it right to build airmen. So I want to add another piece here about, how to make sure the check ride goes well. A lot of check rides happen at not your home airport too, right? Um, Student flies out to an examiner's airport because the examiner's there and they do the check ride. Build yourself a little tool case for success on that one. Make sure it's not the first time you were at that airport. If you know the test is coming up, you're going to go there, take with your instructor, fly out there, practice some of the maneuvers you're going to have to do. Make that more home than it is foreign to you at that point. Go there first, get familiar with it. If you've got an early morning check ride and you're flying somewhere, I did this for my original CFI. It was an 8 a.m. check ride, an hour and a half flight away. I just flew up the night before and grabbed a hotel. Give yourself that success to be there so you're not fried, you're not tired, and be ready to do that on the day of the test. It can also be a matter of, hey, boy, the weather looks like it might be a little scuzzy in the morning, but it's going to clean up. If I go the night before, maybe we got some fall fog, something like that, we're going to be able to get through the ground. And by the time the ground's done, the fog will be gone. If I had to go up there that morning of, I might not get there. The examiner might have an afternoon check ride scheduled and not be able to push back. Think about these types of things as well to maximize the use of that check ride slot. And I get there's a little cost maybe to fly up and stay overnight and stuff, but a good night's rest is going to give you a lot better chance at doing well on that practical test.
Mm-hmm.
Look at those situations and the conditions that are happening and give yourself the best ability to be rested going into that test and have the airplane and you in the position you need to be to start that check ride when it was scheduled.
And that's another point where communicate with that examiner in advance. You have those forecasts, 48, 72 hours out. Yeah, sure, they're still a little squishy and things could change. You probably have a general idea on the big picture and ask that question. Hey, it is looking like we might have something. Can you have flexibility if I flew up later in the morning? Or do you have that afternoon booked? And if you're
And a lot of
asking
times
them three,
we'll
four
work
days
with
in
you.
advance, it gives you more room to plan.
And we may be able to adjust the schedule. I've got somebody coming up pretty soon here. We had a discontinuance for some weather. I'm going to an airport kind of between us. Well, I put the guy who's based at that airport in the morning because his airplane's there, and left the afternoon slot for the guy who's got to fly there, right? So
Mhm.
we can schedule things like that sometimes that help you have a better shot at making that check ride happen. I'm not making the poor guy fly out at 6 a.m. in the dark to get to me, right? He can now do it in the morning, get the plane ready. If he runs into any hiccups, he's got a little time to deal with it and still get to me. And where I'm starting the check ride on that day is where the airplane's based. It's in a hangar, it's safe, it's secure, and we can get started and go from there. So a lot of times we'll help, if you give us some notice again, that 48 hours notice, we've got a little time to beat that 24-hour clock. And DMS goes a long ways if we can shuffle things and move stuff around to help you out.
Yeah, certainly. So like we said, it's working both sides of the system. So the FAA is working to build that DPE population to get it to where it needs to be. There's a lot of factors in that. It does take some time. But also being respectful of the schedule and not seeing your DPE as just, the guy there to make a buck, because they've got the designation, and working with that, because that'll ultimately work better for you down the road.
I think in the end, we started with, is it a DPE shortage, right? And the answer is kind of, but it's also a systemic, how it's working, kind of question, right? Do we have enough DPEs? Are we using those DPEs well? Is the people that are showing up to practical tests, are they qualifiable? Do they have aircraft that are airworthy? All of those things kind of come together and make us either better or, less prepared to maximize the use of that DPE resource. So the key is we've all got to kind of communicate, work with each other. We've got to make sure the training system is doing its part to make sure that people are actually meeting the experience requirements, that the DPs are able to qualify the people, that the airplanes are able to proceed, that the DPEs are offering time when they can. And if we get all of this working better, I honestly think we can have a 15 or 20% increase in the use of our DPE resource. So as the FAA adds a few more and we get better as a system at making sure the people that show up can actually proceed, I think the backlog starts to clear itself a little bit because we're using the system better.
Yeah, so attacking the problem from multiple angles.
Yeah, there's definitely no just one answer to this one, unfortunately.
Right. So, all right, Jason. Well, thanks so much for taking the time to come on More Right Rudder with us today and share your insights. We're always happy to have you.
My absolute pleasure.
Thanks.